I thought I'd do something a little different. I'm working on my subplots, and I thought I'd bring you along with me to show you how I'm working these things out in real time. So the way that I'm going to do that is I have my handy dandy notebook here, and I'm going to go through pretty much each character. So first I'm going to start with my main character. So I'm not going to go over my notes for the story that I'm writing now because spoilers, but I will go over my process when I'm thinking about subplots. I always start with the main character and write their main plot following their main goal, which is basically just the plot of the story. If somebody was to ask, hey, what's your story about, Ray? This is what I'd tell them. And then I also write down the major theme of the story, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. After I have the main plot and the theme, I actually write down the subplots of my main characters. I like my characters to be well-rounded. I'm sure you all do too. So my main character isn't a robot that only has one goal and one motivation and is laser focused on only one thing, because that's not how humans work. They're gonna have some mini plots along the way that might help them reach their main goal. Also maybe some parallel plots that are happening at the same time but still kind of tie in and speak to the major through line of the story. I also note down some context, like maybe some backstory or some unhealed wounds, or even, their misbeliefs about why they're going after this goal in this particular way. And all of these mini subplots that I'm going through, I'm actually going to tie back to the, you guessed it, theme. That's why I note it down. And the reason why I do this is because I want most, if not all, of my subplots to speak to this theme. Now, they don't necessarily have to be a subplot that has the exact same theme as the main plot, because then what's the point? You're getting redundant and repetitive. But I want my subplots to either give the theme more depth, different perspectives, or something along those lines. So if there's a theme in a story about not losing yourself to your goals, then a theme to a subplot might be something along the lines of following your own moral compass. That, of course, ties into the main theme, because if you follow your moral compass, you're less likely to lose yourself in your goal, get hyperfixated, and forget what's important. Now, when I'm looking at subplots for characters, there's a few different things that I'll consider a subplot, and different things that I'll note down during this process that might not be strictly a subplot, but is close enough that I still want to write it down at this time. So these are things like mini plots, where maybe they have to go through different steps or challenges in order to achieve their main goal. That would be like a sub or mini plot. There could also be parallel plots, where as they're trying to achieve this goal, there's something else going on in their lives that kind of relates to it, but is not exactly the same thing and might have its own theme. I also add a little bit of context. This can be something like their backstory or some internal wounds that they have to deal with, their misbeliefs, stuff like that, just to kind of give the subplots context. And then, of course, I look at relationships too, because a major way that subplots come into a story is through the relationships with the main characters. So if you have, say, a best friend of the main character, that best friend might be its own subplot. So speaking of the side character, after the main character, I do kind of the same thing with each side character. This is mostly for the major side characters, those secondary characters that get a lot of page time and are in close proximity to the main character, whose actions are going to have the most effect on the main character. So these characters usually have their own goal. So even in the side characters, I will put their main subplot. So what is it that they're trying to do? If they're in cahoots with the main character and they're going after the same goal, a lot of times the side character will have their own reason for doing that. So when their goals are the same, their motivations, their perspective, all of that might be slightly different, and again, add depth and context and layers into the story, making it a lot more juicy. So they will have their own perspective on their own goals, and of course a theme for that too. The theme, just like down here, should tie into the main character's theme. They themselves might also have subplots. They're not going to be as detailed as the main character's subplots, but Maybe they will have their own little mini missions that they have to accomplish in order to reach the overall goal of the story. They will have their own relationships with each other. Not necessarily romantic relationships, I'm not talking about that necessarily, but if you're going to be spending time with someone, that's going to form some sort of relationship, whether that's a best friend, a mentor-student type of relationship, even antagonists. That being said, I'd also do this for the main antagonist, because in a story with a really well-rounded, fleshed out antagonist, they're gonna have their own motivations and goals for what they're doing, and they might have, you know, their own context for why they're doing it, relationships with different characters, and I just like to kind of write that all down. Doing it this way helps me keep the characters, the plots, and the themes, three major parts of my story, kind of interconnected and tied together, so the overall story is cohesive. And it helps me prevent some of these subplots kind of running away on their own and writing a bunch of like maybe cool or interesting to me, but ultimately irrelevant to the story subplots. And I'm sure there's some people out there that are like, just write, you know, even if it is irrelevant, you'll cut it out later, which yes, I definitely agree with that, but I am obviously a plotter to the nines. Part of my writing process is going through all of this plot stuff, so when I sit down, I know exactly where I'm going with things. So this really helps me, keeps me motivated actually, and keeps me writing. So it might not be for everyone. This might be best for some people in their editing process instead of their pre-writing process like it is for me. On that note of keeping the characters, the plots, and the themes all kind of woven together and to make something cohesive, I think that the imagery that best kind of sums up the way that I think about these things is a maypole. This is something where on May Day in different places, usually I believe in Europe, you have a solid pole in the middle with a bunch of ribbons coming off of it, and you have different people in the community each grabbing a ribbon, and they dance around each other and the pole to create basically a braid going down the pole. In the end, it all is surrounding that middle structure, but it's its own thing, weaving in and out of each other and the pole. I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to make a mini version of it. All right, y'all, here it is. But this is like my 30-second mini version of one. So if this is the maypole, this right here, this is the main plot of the story that follows the main character and is the main thing that we're focusing on. Then you have all of these lovely little strings coming off of it, which would be like the ribbons on a maypole. And as the story progresses, they kind of wrap around the main plot as well. They're their own thing, but they kind of add to the beauty of the overall center structure. And then maybe some of these weave together as well, and they do their own thing, you know, as they're weaving around this way, but the whole time the story is still progressing and it's still wrapping around that main plot. And the cool thing about this too is each of these is a subplot. That subplot is tied to a character, which means that all the subplots characters are still gonna affect the main character. Otherwise, why would you have them in the story? But probably less obviously when it comes to subplots, all of these little mini themes that are attached to these subplots are still wrapping around that major theme of the story too. So now we just have to do it. So I'm going to take some time to write out all the things that have been floating around in my head when it comes to subplots, and I'll let you know if I have any notes. So I'm realizing that one of the benefits of doing it this way is really differentiating between some of my main sub-characters and some of my background characters, which might have a little less page time and importance in the story. I still like writing them out because what I'm realizing is a lot of times these like background characters that still have an effect on the overall story will often have effect on some of the more important sub-characters as well. So I'm able to kind of like write those relationships in. And in doing so, it also helps me mentally plot out how some of these subplots are going to weave into the main story and where they're going to kind of come up and when it makes sense for them to do so, because I'm going to be looking at how and when their actions will affect the overall story. I'm also realizing that I kind of have an in-between character, somebody who's not necessarily super close to the main plot of the story and following the main plot. In fact, they're decidedly on the outside of the main plot. They don't really know what's going on in that sense. But they're also not the antagonists of the story, so they're not in direct opposition, even though they're not helping the main character in their goal, and they're not a background character. But they still have a major role in not only the main character's life, but also in their goal. So their actions still have a major effect. This isn't exactly a detailed instructional on what a subplot is and how to use them in your story, examples and things like that. This is more how I'm figuring out my subplots. But if you want a more detailed video on subplots, let me know and I will be sure to get on that. Thanks for watching, you guys. I had actually a lot of fun tonight. I am so tired though. I am about to go to bed. So I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Peace.